Laura Hayes and Emily Carter were inseparable best friends, until one summer night in 1993 when Emily vanished without a trace, and Laura became the last person to ever see her alive. 30 years later, a single mistake would expose the chilling truth Laura had buried along with her friend. On a warm evening in June of 1993, the quiet suburban town of Crestwood found itself on the edge of a mystery that would last for decades. Emily Carter, a bright and cheerful 19-year-old, had spent the night at a neighborhood party with her best friend, Laura Hayes. The two had grown up together, inseparable since childhood, and were often seen as sisters by those who knew them. At the party, Emily laughed, danced, and made plans for the summer. She was looking forward to starting college in the fall, her future wide open with promise. But by the next morning, Emily was gone. Witnesses recalled that she had left the party late, just before midnight, walking out with Laura. According to Laura, they parted ways shortly after, and Emily headed home on foot. That was the last time anyone claimed to have seen her. When she failed to return home, her parents immediately contacted the police. Searches began almost instantly, with volunteers scouring nearby woods, fields, and rivers. Helicopters circled overhead, and dogs were brought in to track her scent. Despite the town's efforts, not a single trace of Emily was found. The case baffled investigators. There were no signs of struggle along the road she should have taken, no personal belongings left behind, and no witnesses who reported suspicious activity. It was as if Emily had simply vanished into the night. Fear spread quickly through Crestwood, parents warning their children not to walk alone, neighbors locking their doors earlier than usual. In a town where nothing truly dark had ever happened, the disappearance left a scar of unease. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and eventually the search slowed. The posters on telephone poles faded in the sun, but the mystery of Emily Carter remained painfully alive. From the very beginning, Laura Hayes placed herself at the center of the search for Emily. She spoke to reporters with tears in her eyes, telling them how worried she was and how much she missed her best friend. She walked door to door with Emily's parents, handing out flyers with Emily's photograph, her voice trembling as she begged anyone with information to come forward. To the outside world, Laura appeared to be a devoted friend who was suffering just as much as everyone else. Her willingness to help convinced investigators she had nothing to hide. When questioned, Laura repeated her story without hesitation. She explained that she and Emily had left the party together and talked for a short while before parting ways. Emily was supposed to take the familiar path home, and Laura insisted she had watched her walk in that direction before going to her own house. Detectives could not find any holes in her account. There were no witnesses who contradicted her, and no evidence suggested otherwise. At only 19 years old, Laura seemed to many like another victim of the tragedy, grieving the sudden loss of the person she had shared nearly every milestone with. As weeks turned into months, Laura's life returned to something close to normal. While Emily's family remained trapped in grief, Laura began planning her own future. She moved away from Crestwood within a year, telling acquaintances she couldn't bear to stay in a place haunted by so many memories. She eventually married, started a family, and launched a business that earned her respect in her new community. To those around her, Laura carried the look of someone touched by tragedy, but strong enough to overcome it. Behind her calm exterior, however, the truth of that night remained carefully buried. Although time moved forward, the town of Crestwood never truly let go of Emily Carter's disappearance. Her smiling face remained etched into the memories of everyone who had grown up alongside her. Each year, on the anniversary of the night she vanished, Emily's parents organized a candlelight vigil in the town square. Dozens of people gathered, holding photographs and speaking about the young woman who should have had her whole life ahead of her. The vigils became a tradition, a way to keep Emily's memory alive even when the investigation had gone silent. For many residents, the unsolved case became more than just a tragedy. It was a wound that never healed. Older neighbors still locked their doors early, and parents used Emily's story to warn their children about the dangers of walking alone at night. Among the younger generation, the mystery became the subject of whispered conversations, with each retelling adding new layers of speculation. Some insisted Emily must have run away, while others swore she had been the victim of someone close to her. Laura Hayes, who had once been seen as Emily's closest confidant, often came up in those hushed discussions. While she appeared devastated in public, some who knew her back then remembered small details that unsettled them. They recalled how quickly she had moved on, how her emotions seemed controlled rather than raw, and how she avoided answering too many questions about that night. With no proof, suspicions remained only whispers. Years later, as online communities dedicated to unsolved crimes grew, Emily's case gained fresh attention. Amateur sleuths pored over old articles and police reports, piecing together timelines and speculating about motives. More often than not, their theories circled back to Laura. Still, without evidence, she remained untouchable, and the town's most haunting question, what really happened to Emily, stayed unanswered. Nearly 3 decades after Emily Carter's disappearance, Crestwood was jolted back into the nightmare it thought had been left in the past. In the fall of 2021, a construction crew began work on an expansion project behind the Hayes family's old property. The land had been vacant for years, sold and resold, but now heavy machinery was cutting into the soil to prepare it for new foundations. Midway through the excavation, workers struck something that immediately stopped the project. At first, it looked like a bundle of rotting fabric buried shallow beneath the earth. But as they cleared away the dirt, bones began to emerge. Law enforcement was called immediately. The area was cordoned off with tape as investigators carefully uncovered the site. The remains were wrapped in what looked like a faded, mold-stained blanket. Time and moisture had reduced most of the material to fragments. But the discovery was unmistakable. A body had been hidden here for decades. Forensic teams collected every scrap, knowing that modern technology might uncover truths that were invisible in 1993. The news spread through Crestwood in hours. Residents gathered behind the barricades, whispering and pointing at the field they had walked past countless times. The very ground that children had played on and neighbors had ignored for years had concealed the town's darkest secret. The body was sent for testing, and within weeks, DNA results provided confirmation that shattered whatever hope remained. The remains belonged to Emily Carter. The finding transformed a cold case into an active homicide investigation. No longer was Emily the girl who simply vanished into thin air. She was a victim who had been hidden in plain sight, buried less than half a mile from where she was last seen alive. And the location of the grave raised an unsettling question about who had placed her there. When Emily's remains were confirmed, investigators immediately returned to Laura Hayes' statements from 1993. She had insisted that Emily left her side alive and had walked home alone, yet the grave's location contradicted that claim. The burial site was just a short walk from Laura's family home, in a place she would have known well. It was too close, too familiar, and too deliberate to be ignored. Detectives began to carefully reconstruct the night of the disappearance, searching for details that had been overlooked. Old witness reports were revisited, and for the first time, patterns began to emerge. Several partygoers remembered that Emily and Laura had argued that night, their voices raised in frustration. Though the details of the disagreement were never clear, some recalled seeing Emily upset when she left. In 1993, those accounts were brushed aside as the quarrels of two friends. Now, they took on a darker weight. Advancements in forensic science also breathed new life into the evidence. Soil samples from the blanket showed fibers consistent with products once sold at the Hayes family's department store, linking the burial directly back to Laura's household. Even the way the body had been hidden suggested someone young and inexperienced had acted in haste. Detectives noticed something else too. Laura had been unusually precise in her early interviews, repeating her version of events word for word without variation. What once looked like consistency now appeared rehearsed. The polished story that had protected her all these years suddenly seemed fragile. With the discovery of Emily's grave, every sentence Laura had spoken nearly 30 years earlier was placed under a microscope. Slowly, the perfect image of a grieving best friend began to crack, revealing the possibility that Laura had known far more than she ever admitted. For nearly 3 decades, Laura Hayes had lived with the secret of Emily Carter's death buried deep beneath the soil of her old neighborhood. She had built an entirely new life, far removed from Crestwood, certain that the past was untouchable. But the fatal mistake that unraveled everything was not made in 1993. It came years later, when she decided to return to her hometown and sell the very property that concealed her crime. What should have been a profitable transaction instead became the trigger for a devastating discovery. In order to finalize the sale, the land required new surveys and inspections. Developers soon moved in, clearing brush and preparing the site for construction. Heavy machinery dug deeper than anyone had before, breaking into the hidden grave. Laura had counted on time and nature to guard her secret forever, but progress and development left her exposed. Without her decision to sell, Emily's remains might have remained undiscovered for another 30 years, or perhaps forever. Investigators quickly recognized the significance of this twist. The grave had been disturbed only because Laura herself had chosen to make money from the land. It was as if her own actions had called Emily back from the silence of history. To police and prosecutors, this wasn't simply coincidence. It was carelessness born from overconfidence. For decades, Laura had lived freely, secure in the belief that her past was safely buried. But by trying to profit from it, she sealed her fate. The irony was impossible to ignore. For years, Laura had succeeded in presenting herself as the unlucky survivor of a tragedy. But in her attempt to close the last chapter of her connection to Crestwood, she instead opened the one door she had worked her whole life to keep locked. As the investigation closed in, Laura Hayes found herself trapped by evidence that could no longer be ignored. Detectives presented her with the DNA results, the soil analysis, and the witness recollections that had once been overlooked. The burial site's proximity to her childhood home was impossible to explain away. For years, she had relied on the absence of proof to keep her safe, but now the proof was undeniable. The image of a devoted friend, the girl who had cried in front of cameras and passed out flyers, shattered under the weight of science and memory. Prosecutors revealed a motive that cast Laura in an entirely new light. Emily Carter had been accepted into a prestigious university program, an opportunity Laura desperately wanted but failed to achieve. Friends had described how Laura's jealousy often showed itself in small, sharp ways. On the night of the party, that envy boiled over during their argument. Investigators believed the confrontation escalated, leading to Emily's death. Faced with the consequences, Laura acted out of fear, choosing to hide the body rather than face what she had done. In court, decades of deception were laid bare. The woman who had lived as a successful business owner and respected member of her community was revealed to be a killer who had outsmarted everyone. Until now. The jury listened to the reconstructed timeline, the scientific evidence, and the stories of those who had doubted her all along. After weeks of testimony, the verdict was clear. Laura Hayes was found guilty of murdering her best friend. For Emily's family, the moment was both painful and healing. 30 years of questions finally had an answer. Though justice had been delayed, it had not been denied. Emily Carter could finally be remembered not as a mystery, but as a young woman whose truth was at last brought into the light.